Hi everyone, welcome back to a Vox Markets investor webinar. This evening we have Ben Turney, Executive Director of Kavango Resources. He'll be taking us firstly through his investor presentation before then answering some questions at the end. Remember that if you have a question that you'd like to ask, you can do so by using the comment box on the right. I'll now hand you over to Ben and we'll see you at the end for some questions. Thank you.
Hi, and welcome to the presentation from Kavango Resources. My name is Ben Turney and I'm an Executive Director of the company. Today I'm going to walk you through our efforts at Kavango over the last few years to de-risk our project in the Kalahari Suture Zone, located in the southwest of Botswana. The KSZ is an underexplored magnetic system, 450 kilometres long, that has the potential to hold massive sulfide metal ore bodies. Now, you see in front of you the usual disclaimer. What I'd like to add just before we begin the presentation is that today I'm going to present to you a visually compelling reason why Kavango should be in your portfolio. What I'd like to say as a bit of a caveat to all of this is that despite our best efforts, we are dealing with fairly imprecise science. The methods that we've deployed in the KSZ are largely untested. If we're able to be successful, then of course this will be transformational for the company. But until we're able to test our targets with actual drilling, of course, there is still a lot of speculation. Now, the Kalahari Suture Zone itself is a very large project. Kavango has the controlling stake. The KSZ was first identified in the 1970s by airborne magnetic surveys flown by a Canadian development company. You can see here on the left of your screen, over my cursor, the magnetic model of the KSZ, and on that you can see Kavango's licence areas. In the northern section, which we call Hukunsi, this is our primary area of focus. This is where most of our exploration money has been spent to date. Increasingly, however, we are also opening up the southern section of the KSZ, and the ground in between is largely on a national park, so it's out of reach. So to all intents and purposes, Kavango does have the controlling stake over the KSZ. Now, as part of our efforts, we've recruited a number of world-renowned experts to help us unlock this system's potential, including Dr. David Holwell, Dr. Martin Prendergast, Spectral Geophysics, who are conducting our TDEM surveys, with whom we have a strategic partnership, and a number of other specialist contractors from around the world. Now, what's particularly interesting about the Kalahari Suture Zone is its position relative to the Karpval Craton. It sits on the western edge of this major continental craton, which is an area historically or in ancient times of significant volcanic activity. When the area was first identified, because it sits underneath 70 meters of Kalahari sands, when it was first identified in the 1970s by these airborne surveys, the excitement was caused because it was recognized the similarities between this region, the signatures that it was giving off, and the Norilsk mining center located in northern Russia. Now, Norilsk is one of the most prolific mining centres in human history that's been in continuous production since the 1920s and accounts for a significant proportion of the world's copper, nickel and platinum group metal mining even today. So in the Kalahari Suture Zone, our aim for 2021 is proof of concept. As I mentioned at the start of this presentation, we've deployed innovative technologies to identify drill targets within the KSZ, and we're doing everything we can to de-risk this. But before we start to take a look at that, it's just worth considering some of the challenges that we're facing in this region. The Kalahari cover extends from about 20 to 70 meters and covers the entire region's geology. Now, this is both a hindrance to exploration historically, but also could be at the heart of the opportunity that we find today. Because no outcropping reached surface, we believe this is the reason that this region has been overlooked by historic exploration efforts and why the Kalahari Suture Zone remains untouched as a potentially prolific mining centre in its own right. Now, interestingly enough, above the gabbros, and we'll talk a bit more about gabbros, this is a word that you need to understand. A gabbro is effectively solidified magma, which came to surface in the Karoo Age about 160 to 180 million years ago. But underneath, on top of these Karoo gabbros, you can see the Karoo supergroup of rocks. Now, what's particularly relevant about this is it's our belief that the mineralization that could occur within these gabbros, within these Karoo Age gabbros, has been unaffected by weathering. So where at Norilsk came to surface, and over millions of years, much of the mineralization was lost. Because of the presence of the Kalahari cover and the Karoo supergroup rocks, these effectively isolated the Karoo age gabbro sills and dikes from millions of years of weathering. Now, if we are able to find economic mineralization, our hope is that we'll find this on a large scale. So the aim today is to talk you through what exactly we've done. Now, as an original investor in Kavango, when it first came to market, one of the areas that I've always struggled with when looking at a company like this is when I read an announcement about what a company has done, it can be a bit hard to put that into context. So when a company talks about airborne surveys that it might have flown, well, what does that actually look like? What are the results of that? What is it that the geophysical and the geological team analysed to help them discover drill targets? What we're looking at here are the results from airborne surveys that Kavango flew in 2018 and 2019. Now, working in the Kalahari suture zone, it is a technically complex environment, and because of the Kalahari cover that sits over the top of it, this makes it extremely challenging to understand the subsurface geology. Now, to date, well, prior to 2019, it was widely recognised that widely felt, I should say, that airborne surveys would be the way to identify drill targets. And what we can see on the left-hand side here are the results of our airborne surveys that we flew a few years ago. However, we came to the conclusion as a company towards the end of 2019 that airborne mag on its own was too blunt a technology for drill targeting. In other words, the signals that were given off could potentially have been a bit misleading if left in their own right and if used solely to base drill targeting decisions. Now, a number of companies historically have drilled in the KSZ. In the 1980s and 1990s, some extremely large firms put holes into the ground here. But from the core data that we've seen and the analysis we've conducted, we believe that these companies were looking in the wrong areas. And I'm going to show you some images from further follow-up work that we've done that supports this view. But what I'd like to draw your attention to on this right-hand image are the 4 holes that Kavango drilled in 2019. Now, these holes were relatively shallow and targeted the thin sill-like features of the gabbros in these 2 areas of target areas B and C. Now, at the time, Kavango's funds were fairly limited, so we had a fairly limited drill campaign that we could afford. But what we really hoped to achieve with these drill holes was to intercept the gabbros, to penetrate right through them, and to use the core data that we gathered from that as an orientation for subsequent work that we then did to follow up. I'll show you the results of that work a little later on, but that campaign was a big success for the company. The data that we achieved and we received from it has been hugely valuable in augmenting our exploration strategy since. And now that we're moving towards drilling what we hope will be mineralized targets, this really is the foundation that we're moving forward confidently with. Now, to the south, you'll see this whole DDH CKP8A, which we colloquially call CKP8. Now, this was the deepest hole that's ever been drilled in the KSZ, and the data that we've taken from the core samples taken from that hole, it went down to 450 meters, has been extremely valuable for us in assessing the overall potential of the KSZ to hold magmatic sulfide ore bodies. Now, the Norilsk comparison is an important one for Kavango. We saw earlier on the map the relative positions of Kavango and the Kalahari suture zone and Norilsk relative to continental cratons, and how their magnetic signatures are very, very similar. But what we're looking at here is an illustrative cross-section of one of the main Norilsk ore bodies. Now, in our announcements, we regularly refer to the KSZ as potentially being an analogue of Norilsk. And in particular, one of the key things to note about Norilsk is what's known as its morphology. Morphology essentially means the shape of the rocks underground. Now, what you can see here is this very notable, characteristic keel and gull wing formation. So imagine the bottom of the keel of a ship here, which is the bottom of the gabbro down into the dike. And as the magma sought to extrude to the surface, it's spread out in these planar shapes, which are very similar to the wings of a seagull. Now, the ore bodies at Norilsk occur in two main locations. They occur towards the bottom of the keels and within the wall rock breccias of the dikes. So you can see here this orange illustration here and the red at the bottom. These both represent massive sulfide ore bodies. Now, the airborne surveys that we flew in 2018 and 2019, although those didn't identify conductive drill targets, they did provide Kavango with the data to create a comprehensive 3D underground magnetic model of the Kalahari Suture Zone. And what you're looking at here is a screenshot taken from one of the areas that our partner Mira Geoscience created using the data that we gathered. Now, of course, when we first received this data, we were extremely excited because what you can see here are almost identical keel and gull wing shapes of rock formations within the KSZ. So in other words, what we're looking at here is very, very similar to the style and makeup of the Norilsk formations. Now, interestingly enough, what you can also see on this screenshot is these red lines, these vertical red lines, each of these represents a hole that's been drilled into the KSZ. Now, some of these, such as this hole here, are very deep. These are exploration holes. This is actually CKP8 that we're looking at here. Others are much shallower, and these typically are water bore holes because obviously it's a very arid part of the world, so there has been a lot of drilling. Now, the drill data from all of these holes has been extremely helpful for us because essentially it's provided us with a second data set that we've been able to compare against our airborne data, and that essentially has enabled us to confirm the accuracy of this 3D model that we've built. So in other words, we've got a high degree of confidence that our understanding of the subsurface geology of the Kalahari Suture Zone is very accurate. Now, this is important because this obviously is guiding our future exploration strategy. Now, given that we recognise the limitations of airborne magnetics to identify drill targets, it's worth for a moment just considering this slide. So what you're looking at here is a rectangle shape, which if you imagine divided into two, this represents the area of the first two TDEM surveys that we performed in the Kalahari Suture Zone early this year. Now, what we've done here is we've applied the area of these TDEM surveys over the regional magnetic model. And the dot that you can see, which I'm highlighting with my cursor at the moment, this is CKP8. And what you'll notice is that CKP8, the decision that the Canadian firm in the mid-1980s made to drill this hole, which went down to 480 meters, is they were guided of what at the time looked like a very attractive magnetic target, and they pretty much stuck a hole right through the middle of this thing, but they didn't find anything. If I move on to the next slide, what we're now going to look at, these are the first results from the first two TDEM surveys, time domain electromagnetic surveys that we conducted in the Kalahari Suture Zone. Now, the TDEM surveys, these are a ground-based method, much more powerful, where a large 1 square kilometre copper loop is laid on the ground and a very powerful electric current is passed through that. A transmitter is then walked up and down 3 kilometre lines, and as the current is passed through the Earth's surface, charging it up, this returns signals from whatever is encountered underground. Now, the first survey that we conducted was called A1, which is essentially to the right of the rectangular box. So if you imagine from the previous slide, this is the area of the rectangle, and the first survey that we conducted was to the right, right over CKP8. The reason that we conducted that survey was we wanted to understand more about the original decision to go and drill that about 35 years ago. Now, what we discovered from this TDEM survey is, as you can see, the red lines and the purple that you see here, these are indicators of a conductor being in place, a high-speed conductor. And of course, what we can see is that we basically didn't find anything. What we believe actually happened was that if this green body that you can see, this is actually formed by what's called the Proterozoic gabbro. So these were volcanoes that existed 1.1 billion years ago and are much, much deeper under the Earth's surface. The targets that we're looking for, or that we're approaching, are in the Karoo Age gabbros, which are about 180 million years old. Now, if I just flick between the slides, you'll see that this large indentation towards the surface appears to coincide quite neatly with this magnetic reading. So what we believe is the airborne surface actually picked up the noise from the underlying formation, which is about 900 meters below the surface. So obviously as a modern exploration target, that isn't a really very viable one. Now, where results for Kavango started to get much more interesting is if we look at this area to the left, which was our second survey over A2. And this is where we've now found our very interesting conductive target. So what we're looking at here is the same image from our model, but obviously with a horizontal view. And this just starts to give you a bit of a feel for the conductive nature of the target that the A2 survey identified. Underneath, we can see the Proterozoic age gabbros. So these are the gabbros that are much deeper and much older. Who knows, they may well contain ore bodies of their own. But it's our belief that it's the Karoo age gabbros, which are closer to surface, that are the most attractive exploration targets for the company as we move forward. Now, moving on, what we can see here is this gives you an idea of the surface footprint of the conductor that we identified. So if you imagine the conductive body is buried beneath the surface, and this emits quite a significant footprint that by the time it reaches the surface is over a much, much larger surface area. As you can see here, over CKP8, we have no such footprint. But interestingly enough, out to the west, it looks like we've clipped another potential conductive target. And it's our plan in future to follow up with another TDEM survey once we've finished our current campaign to go and see what's over in this region. But for the time being, our focus is very much on A2 and also looking at the other areas, areas B, C, and D, which are on the maps you saw earlier on. So what is it we're looking for? When conducting TDEM surveys, it's quite common that multiple conductors will be encountered. What we're looking for are conductors that sit within the right geological setting. And by that, what I mean is we're looking for conductive targets that sit towards the bottom of the keel formations. So if you remember back to our geological model on this slide, which I'm just shooting back to, we're looking in, broadly speaking, in these types of areas for high-speed conductive targets that it's our belief that if they're in the right location and they're emitting the right type of signal, then those are high priority drill targets for us. And as you can see here, you start to get a bit of a feel that we're looking towards the bottom of the keel formation. The Karoo age gabbro is this lighter green formation that we can see at the top. The Proterozoic gabbro, which is 1.1 billion years, that sits underneath. And what we can see here is we're just starting to get a feel that this conductive target is sitting in the right area. It looks very, very interesting from a positional point of view. Now, as we zoom in, what becomes even more interesting about this is that the conductor itself also seems to coincide at the contact point between the Proterozoic gabbro, which is this dark green area here, and the Karoo age gabbro, the much younger gabbro, which sits right above that. So this looks like over a period of about 900 million years, you've had two volcanic systems that have interacted with each other. And it's our belief that the Karoo age gabbros passed through the Proterozoic gabbros, which in turn created the circumstances that could have created magmatic sulfide ore bodies. The imagery itself looks very compelling at this stage. Of course, we do still have to go and test this with drilling, but in terms of the actual location of this target, it's already looking very, very encouraging. So let's talk a bit more about the target itself and its conductive signal. Now, as you'd expect with a body like this, the actual target is going to be much smaller than the signal that it emits. So the purple and blue colors, the darker colors, that's the signal. The more red the target becomes, the more likely this is the area of the actual conductive target itself. Now, Spectral Geophysics provided us with some initial analysis of their work. It's quite a detailed report, which described in detail the nature of the conductor target. Now, we still have to establish the size and thickness of this, which we'll only ever be able to do by drilling. But what we have done is we followed up, and I'm about to show you some slides, with further analysis from 3 experts, one from Australia, one from Canada, and one from Denmark, who are all independent, to confirm the work that Spectral have done on our behalf, that what we're looking at is increasingly a high confidence drill target. Now, one of the points to mention, which we've talked about in our RNS, is this 3000 Siemens reading. That's significant because that is on the high side. It suggests that this body is not a water body, so we don't think we're looking at saline water, which can be quite common in the Kalahari Suture Zone, nor do we think it's graphite. Until, of course, we actually test drill, we won't actually know for certain, but to have received a 3,000 Siemens reading on this target, and considering the location of where this target is currently sitting, the bits of the pieces of the jigsaw are starting to fall into place, and we're looking forward to drilling this target later in the year. Now, the body itself is 1 kilometre long. It's about 400 to 450 metres at depth where we plan to site our drill holes, and it's open at strike. So in other words, it's open in both directions. And again, what you can see here is you just start to get more of a feel. So this is a zoomed in view of the conductive body, and it has this quite characteristic keel, or the feel of the keel shape sitting towards the bottom of what we believe is the Karoo Age gabbro. Now, what we're looking at here are some of the data from the first 2 sets of verification that we did. Now, I mentioned that we used consultants in Denmark, Canada, and Australia. This is the work that came out of the work from the guys in Denmark and in Canada. And what they've created for us, one of them created these resistivity profiles, where they took the raw data from the TDEM surveys and created their own model. And what they confirmed was that the TDEM plate model, which Spectral Geophysics created for us, which is this purple area and the red straight lines, which indicates the orientation of the body, their model coincided with the work that Spectral Geophysics have done for us. This is a view from the southeast, and again you can see the Proterozoic gabbro, where our body is sitting towards the top of the Proterozoic gabbro and at the bottom of the Karoo Age gabbro. So again, what this confirms for us is that the geological setting for this target, it's in the right space. So we're definitely in the right postcode to go and start putting some holes into this to bring core samples to surface. Now, this is another view of the same data, and the reason I've included this is that the plate model itself here, if you look at the actual the lines of the plate model, this would suggest that we're not looking at an aquifer. Now, an aquifer is obviously an underground source of water, and for us that's important because, as I mentioned earlier, one of the big risks in drilling in the Kalahari Suture Zone is that there are large underground saline water bodies which can give off misleading readings and potentially could look like ore bodies. So the fact that our plate model suggests that this is not an aquifer, although it's not proof positive, it is nevertheless another encouraging sign that we're looking at quite a high confidence drill target. Now, this is the data from the third verification of our TDEM, and as you can see, the geophysicist, he produced for us, again, his own interpretation of the data that we provided to him, and it coincided pretty much identically with the work that Spectral Geophysics and the other 2 geophysicists have done. This provides you with just a different view. It was a different form of analysis that this geophysicist provided for us. But the image at the top here, this was his model that he created, which coincided right over the top of our conductive body. Because if you remember, the main conductive body emitted the signal that came out in this direction, you can see from my mouse. So again, what we're looking at, it suggests very, very strongly that we're looking at a body that at the very least we have to go and drill to see what's actually down there. And over here, again, as you can see, the target area A1, nothing of interest there to us, but you can see hole CKP8 that went down to 450 meters and was drilled back in about 35 years ago. So that's our presentation for today. If you have any questions, please do ask. I appreciate that this is a bit of a technical pitch that I've had to give today, so hopefully you're all still with me. But I'm looking forward to any questions you may have. So please fire away.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Ben, and welcome to this evening's webinar.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we've had a lot of questions from our community, but let's just start with this target area A, which you've described as being in the right postcode. So you recently discovered this large conductor within the area that is a few kilometers of the drill hole CKP8A, as you say, which, just to reiterate from your presentation, has been the main drill hole studied on the KSZ. So what is the significance of this discovery exactly?
Well, it's not a discovery at this point. We've got to be very careful about the technical terms that we use. A discovery is obviously if we find a commercial ore body. But what we've uncovered with this conductive body, it's exhibiting so far from a geophysical point of view. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, there are risks associated with that. So we've got to be measured in what we say. But according to the models that we've created and the data sets that we've gathered, it's exhibiting all of the characteristics that at this stage of exploration we would hope to see for a high confidence, high priority drill target. So it's located in the right area of the gabbroic intrusion, so in the right area of the rock formations. It's exhibiting the right level of conductance. That 3000 Siemens reading is an important one. It's the right shape, it has the right orientation, and it looks like it's at the right depth. The contact point as well between the conductor, what we believe is the conductor, and the bottom of the gabbroic keel also looks significant. So far so good. We're very fortunate to have found something like this at this stage, which we're looking forward to going and drilling later this year.
That's great. And you've had the analysis confirmed by several specialists.
Yes.
In order to verify the original conductor identified. Why did you consult so many?
Well, the simple answer is it was maybe too good to be true is a bit of an exaggeration, but it was such a turn up on our second survey. The result was so good that we really wanted to go out and triple check it, just to make sure that before we released anything to the market, before we obviously announced these numbers, we'd done everything we could to crash test initially the report that Spectral Geophysics provided for us, but then also the work that other consultants subsequently did. And you know, we're obviously over the moon that so far everybody is in alignment. Everyone agrees with what they've seen. They agree with the readings. They agree with the interpretation of the data. It does look like we have a really great target to work with in this area.
Great. Now, can we get a little bit more into this analysis? If you could elaborate on the size, the geological position, as well as the depth of this main conductor, and just explain why these factors are so important for the target as a future potential target.
Okay, sure. Well, let's if we start with the position of it. So there are obviously beneath the ground there are different types of conductive targets. So as I mentioned in the presentation, one of the big risks in the Kalahari suture zone are underground saline water bodies. Obviously, with them being salt water, they can give off a very powerful conductive reading, which could look like an ore body if you're only using geophysical data to analyze them. So that's a risk in exploration because, frankly, we're not interested in finding groundwater. That's of no use to us. So the conductance obviously is very important, but the position is what really guided our analysis at this stage. So we developed in partnership with Mira Geoscience, the underground model. That's what we announced last September. I provided a screenshot of that in the presentation. Now, obviously, that screenshot was just one segment of the entire model that we have. The entire model we have is much more extensive, covering all of the Hukunsi region. So we were looking for conductive targets which sit towards the bottom of the keels of those formations, because we felt that those are a good place to start, because according to the main sort of exploration hypothesis, that's where you're looking for metal sulfide ore bodies. So that was the first step, is the right location. We then obviously had to look at the conductance. So this 3000 Siemens reading that I talked about, it's not a barn burner of a target. That's what one of our geophysicists described it, but he said it does look really, really good. I mean, anything above 1,000 is very encouraging. 3,000, you know, in his words, you simply have to go and drill this target. We have to see what's down there. So we've got the right conductive signal as well. Then in terms of the orientation, the size and the shape of the conductor, the orange image that I provided on one of the slides in the presentation, which showed the 1 kilometer long open at strike reading or measurement, I should say, of the conductive target. It just looks like the sort of body that we would be looking for. Now, again, still early days, far too early for us to start saying this is an ore body. You know, we've actually got to go and drill this thing to test it. But so far, all of the data is pointing in the same direction. And one point I should have made in the presentation, which I didn't do, is you've got to remember we're also dealing with two distinct data sets. So we have the airborne surveys that we flew. So those provided us with the model for the shape of the underground geology for the region, and then obviously the TDEM data itself, which has provided us with the conductor. So the fact that we've got two very distinct data sets that are aligning with one another, there's a degree of, you know, we're feeling quite positive about that as well.
That's great. And just touching on this TDEM, on these surveys, what can you say about the technology? Because obviously, this region was drilled decades ago. Would this kind of technology would have been available back then?
No, it's only come on in recent years. So our strategic partner in the KSZ, Spectral Geophysics, I mean, they're recognised as being one of Southern Africa's leading firms in this space. Caslot, he's a very well regarded, well known expert in this field with a lot of practical experience on the ground. If you go and look at the announcement, I think it was on the 20th of April or thereabouts when we announced the partnership, you'll see Kaz's CV and track record. I mean, there aren't many people, I would say, worldwide who have the kind of experience that he has. But the technology itself has really only come on in the last 10 years. And that's really at the heart of the opportunity for Kavango in the Kalahari Suture Zone, because the region is covered by this quite deep layer of cover, this 70 meters of Kalahari sands. It's meant in the past, because the regional geology was actually obscured to site, so obviously that meant historic exploration didn't happen, but the remote sensing technology has really only come on to say in about the last decade to enable firms to start to penetrate through that cover and get a clearer picture of what's actually going on under the surface. So it's new technology, new developments, hasn't been deployed in this region before. We're the first to do it, so we believe that gives us a real competitive advantage.
That's great. And just touching on two technical aspects here. Firstly, how deep in meters does it identify potential anomalies? And then also, how much time would you say it cuts down on the exploration work that's required to identify the targets?
Okay, so first question. So it all comes down to the power of the generator that's being used. So for the first surveys that we did, I think our penetration rate was around about 600 meters. Now that we're working in partnership with Spectral, they're providing us with more powerful equipment. Obviously, they've got quite a lot of skin in the game, so it's in their interest to see us succeed and see their shares go up in value. So we're using more powerful generators, and I think our penetration rate's now down to about 800 or 900 meters. But the thing is, for our horizon for exploration, 600 to 700 meters is probably the limit. But I mean, who knows? If we find a really sort of metal rich ore body, then we might well be able to go deeper. But we're expecting to go to a maximum of about 600 to 700. But the sweet spot for us is around about that 400 to 500 meter depth. So that's really our main target horizon. In terms of saving time, well, I get told by a lot of people I talk to about the KSZ, professionals in the field, they view this in their words, it's a big boys project. This is the size of the project is the sort of thing that really, they say one of the majors should be going for. So typically the way that this has been explored in the past is you go out and you drill lots of holes until you eventually strike something. So obviously we're working with more limited means, so therefore we have to be much smarter about how we deploy the technology. So for us, the importance of these TDEM surveys is they're enabling us to go out and define high priority drill targets which exhibit all the characteristics I've just described, so that we can then have quite a high degree of confidence before we actually go and put the drill bit into the ground. The fact that we found a conducted target as good as we did in our second survey, we're extremely happy about that, and we're looking forward to providing more updates in the near future about the other surveys we're running at the moment.
That's great. And can we talk about your partnership with Spectral Geophysics? What kind of benefits does this partnership bring to the project?
Well, I mean, I've already talked about Kaz's experience and his team. I mean, obviously, his engagement with the project for us is fantastic at this stage. He's got decades of experience. He's analysed, tens of thousands of line kilometres of airborne data. That's not so relevant to us in the KSZ at the moment, but in what we're doing in the KCB, you can put two and two together and you can see how that's going to benefit the company we expect in the near future. But in the KSZ, because obviously the use of this TDEM technology, it's quite innovative. It hasn't been used in the region before. So we're all having to think on our feet as the project develops. And, we found that Spectral's input has been extremely useful so far. We've got a very open relationship with them. We're discussing all sorts of ideas constantly, figuring out how we can improve to increase the pace at which these surveys are delivered, but also improve the quality of them as well. I also mentioned a bit earlier, use of technology as well. We're now getting Spectral's, best remote sensing equipment and much more powerful generators, the best of his team. They're heavily incentivized now with the stock that they own. They are fully behind Kavango. So it's for us, it's almost like a mini farming. The next mini farming I'm looking at actively at the moment is with a drill partner. Hopefully we'll have some news on that in the near future. But again, this all comes down to us having to box clever. You're a company, we've got reasonable resources behind us, but we've got a very big project in front of us. So it's important that we pull together and all of the different components we need to run an extensive exploration campaign.
That's great. And can you tell us a bit more about the specific steps ahead of drilling, at the KSZ now?
Yeah, sure. So we're obviously going to complete the next run of TDEM surveys. So we've just, well, I need to be careful what I'm saying, but there are 6 surveys that are planned in target areas, 4 surveys that are planned, I apologise, in targets areas B, C and D. And then we think we're going to come back and do another survey immediately in target area A, just to see what it was that we clipped with survey A2. It looks like there might be another conductive target there. I showed that on the slide, but we don't know until we've actually found that, until we've actually surveyed that. If we find any more conductive targets, then obviously we'll do follow-up surveys on those, because the way this technology works is, if you imagine the first survey gives you like a bird's eye view of the target itself. If you then perform a survey next to that, which comes in at an angle, it gives you an idea of the vertical orientation and the vertical depth of the target you're looking at. So I should have mentioned that in the presentation as well. Sorry, I failed to do that. But the survey A3 that was done, as well as confirming the characteristics of the target at A2, it also gave us a much clearer view and understanding of the vertical incline on it and its depth.
That's great. And can you say anything about the timeline of these 4 surveys exactly?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're doing these as quickly as we can. It's now, it's middle of May. I'm expecting we'll have results very soon on the latest one. I know the next survey is being moved on to. I would guess end of June, hopefully, end of June, early July, to get the TDEM surveys out of the way. Obviously, the guys in the field, they can't work permanently out in the field. They do need to have some downtime, some R&R, because this is fairly intense work. But we are moving through these as quickly as we can.
That's great. Now, just touching on the information that you've gathered, as I understand it, is solely relying on geophysics. How reliable is this method?
Well, that's the $64,000 question. I mean, if you talk to a lot of geologists, they'll roll their eyes at you and tell you that geophysics is little better than tea leaf reading. We don't agree. I mean, the technology that we're using, you can't just go sticking holes into a project like this. You can't see the geology. So you have to do something to try and de-risk the project. That was obviously the theme for the presentation that I've given you. The fact that we're using different geophysical methods, different surveying methods, and that this first target that we've identified, the data, the 2 sets of data all align with one another. We're actually performing a 3rd type of survey on the KSZ at the moment, which we'll be announcing some results about soon. So hopefully we'll have a 3rd data set as well on that. Obviously, the more different data sets you can have that align with one another, then obviously the more that will reduce the risk, we hope. But until we actually drill this target, we won't know for certain what's down there. But even if we don't strike metal sulfides at this point, what no one has ever done in the KSZ, and this is a point I really should make more of and make sure people understand, no one's ever been to the bottom of one of these keels. So that CKP8 hole that I talked about earlier in the presentation, that only went to 450 meters. The keel over that particular target is around about 600, maybe 650. We've looked into reopening that hole, but unfortunately it's closed in on itself, fell in, it's 35 years old. So that's not going to be possible. But our main objective, our main priority this year is proof of concept. So we need to drill some holes to the bottom of some of these keels, because the data that we'll pick up from the core samples from the bottom will tell us a great deal about the actual makeup of the system itself. And one of the things that we've been very excited about previously with CKP8 is the drill core data from that has got quite strong evidence of primary sulfides. Now, we've announced this to the market previously, but I'm not sure that people have really understood the significance of that. Even though they're in small quantities at this stage, which you'd expect higher up in the keel, the fact that we've identified primary sulfides, that's very encouraging for the system itself. So what we now need to do is get to the bottom of the keel. And now that we've got a conductive target that will intersect on our way down there, it's a really exciting time for the company.
That's great, Ben. And I was just going to ask this question, which you've kind of already answered a little bit, but what is the ultimate vision for the project?
Well, the ultimate vision is to open up a major global mining center. I mean, if you look at Norilsk and Voisey's Bay and Jinchuan in China, I mean, the potential in this is just absolutely staggering. We're obviously a tiny company at this stage. Our market cap is 15 million quid. If we can prove that the KSZ does host magmatic sulfide, metal sulfide ore bodies, I should say, then the blue sky potential here is huge. I've been a private investor, and I've done a number of things in this market over the years. I've always been looking for genuine resource exploration projects to get involved in and really throw my weight behind. And this project is real. This is genuinely a world-class project that we're pursuing with that sort of potential. There's obviously a lot of risk with it. It's a huge area. We're breaking new ground with the technology that we're deploying. But yeah, if we can strike a metal ore body or metal sulfides, and we can then take that to some of the majors, then I mean the potential here is just enormous.
That's great, Ben. And just finally, just to segue briefly from the KSZ, has the company analysed any other surveys outside the KSZ that may have similar geological settings? I'm referencing Norilsk here. And if so, based on this, what has been the general outcome once drilled, would you say?
Well, this is obviously where CAS's experience is really beneficial for us. So we haven't needed to go and analyse sort of other TDEM use or applications of TDEM technology out there, because we're working with one of the leading firms that actually does this professionally. So we're benefiting immensely from their experience. The fact that they took on as much stock as they did in our strategic partnership, I mean, that says to me how confident they are in what they've seen so far. I've got to be careful about some of the things I say, but having spoken with CAS about this first target we've identified, we're looking in good shape, and I think we've got the right partner to work with who can provide us with exactly that experience. Because from our point of view, this type of target hasn't ever been explored in this way before. This is new ground, but with the experience that he has and what we're learning on the ground for each survey that we perform, because remember, it's an iterative process. The more of these surveys we complete, the more we're learning about how to refine them and how to make them better. And the results we're seeing so far are looking good.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.